Showroom of Marazzi for this evening design talk. Tonight we're talking about the importance of circular economy in full-scale design, and we welcome to talk about this our speaker, Giovanni Iasevoli, founder of GI Development Consulting here in London. Good evening, Giovanni.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. So we had a chat about circular economy actually a week ago as part of another presentation, and the kind of projects that we work on, they're very much design-led and primarily for hotels and hospitality projects. So the way we look at circular economy there is very often focusing on elements, for example, as the FF&E, which is the furniture, fixtures and equipment. In a simple term is, if you take a building, you turn it upside down, whatever falls out of it, that's FF&E. And we look at ways how that can actually form part of a sustainable approach to it. So we've been doing projects that basically go from the reuse of products, the refurbishment of it, and everything from using a lot of vintage pieces. But then I was thinking, how does that apply in a context like the one that we are here today, right? And on the way here, I was thinking, it actually came back to my mind what, how recycling and reuse was actually thought back in the days. So if we think about back in the 1500s, right, when the Venetians would come up with the terrazzo flooring, right, that was a way to reuse a material which was out of waste in a new way. And it's actually interesting how even then the drivers for it were actually economic drivers rather than not necessarily ethical ones, which is very often the case, I think, in projects, nowadays. And therefore, I think, that's a quite, interesting theme. How very often the constrictions that there are in a project, that may be the inherent to the building itself, that could be the program, or that could be the budget, are often what are a little bit of stimulus and a driver to come up with something else. And I think it's interesting in a context nowadays, designers have the opportunity to actually work with manufacturers to come up with that new set of ideas and so on. So Marazzi, for example, would use recycled waste in the production of some of their tiles, which obviously leads to the LEED accreditation system, which from a development point of view will bring up the BREEAM credits.
Giovanni brought me last week to see one of his latest realizations, which is the Mortimer House, not far from here, in Fitzrovia. It is a wonderful space, very inspiring, and I invite you all, if you've not seen it, to go and see. It is a sort of a new concept for co-working spaces, but even much more than that. I would like you to elaborate a bit on that project, if you wish. Also, in terms of circular economy, so how you could say you translate the four big words of circular economy that are reuse, repair, you mentioned them, reduce and recycle into that very project.
Okay. For who doesn't know Master Mortimer House, it's a new concept of service office building where the organization of the floors follows Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and therefore one will have the physiological spaces on the ground floor, gym and restaurant, progressing all the way to the office spaces, and coming up with the top floor, which is more the self-actualization elements of it, and therefore we use them from anything from like talks, events, even to meditation. And the interesting thing of that project was that in order to enhance and instaurate a dialogue with the Art Deco nature of the building, the approach that was used was actually either to remanufacture a lot of the furniture that we used in there, but also it's about 85% of the FF&E that was used is from vintage products, which is crazy to implement from a development point of view, and cost, because obviously to compliance with all the legislations and etc. And from a cost point of view, actually, it's pretty much cost neutral. But I strongly believe that in doing so, it creates a legacy with what is the original nature of the building, but also at the same time, it creates the storytelling behind the work. So everything from like table chairs to carpet to mirrors and so on were sourced from pretty much from all around the world, from vintage parts. And I think well, I haven't got a picture here, but you're all welcome to come and see it. The effect of it is actually quite impressive.
Giovanni, by the way, would you like to tell us a bit more about your backgrounds? Where do you come from, and how your experience has shifted and created the opportunity for you to start your own company?
I trained and practiced as an architect, and so I was working as a project architect, and then I ended up specializing on project management. And from that, because of my background as well, it ended up being very much design-led projects. Then led to a specialism. I'm trying to sum up a little bit. Okay, I'm not that old, but I've got a few years under the belt. Then from that, it became a lot design-led projects. So some of the most probably notorious hotels and hospitality projects that I've been involved from a personal scale, but then also with our consultancy, is Sanderson Hotel, St. Martin's Lane Hotel, which were actually the ones that started the boutique hotel brand in the UK, being the last ones designed by Strader, and they opened in 2000, the first one. So we did the refurbishment of it in 2014. The now Kingston in Russell Square, the older, former Russell Hotel, interesting, designed by the same architect that designed some of the rooms, was the same one that designed the ballroom of the Titanic. There was a kind of an interesting intrigue there. But then also the Standard Hotel in King's Cross, which was recently opened, and we've done Art Hotel at Battersea Power Station. We're doing Park Hyatt as well, both on site, and quite interesting one of the main ones that we're currently working on is the refurbishment of Fulham Town Hall. So that's great to start listed building. Everything from outside to inside is all listed. A building which was built in 3 different phases for probably over about 100 years in terms of constructions, and it's been a quite how can I say, challenging building to approach because it's so complicated that there is not a one-size-fits-all. So what we tend to do now also is we will work on the very early feasibility stages of a project, and therefore identify new opportunities within a deal. And that's why, probably linking back to the question, is the architectural background in a way helped a lot, I would say, me to identify where the opportunities will rely in unlocking sites which are basically not straightforward, and which come a little bit as a challenge, and but nevertheless that's what I think we like to focus on. So projects which are basically, a little bit head scratching, but I think these are the ones that offer for us opportunity to grow, develop, and have fun, really. I mean, that's really what I think is.
From backgrounds to present and future, I'm sure your clients ask you to sign NDAs, but if you can, and would like to tell us a bit about maybe a couple of major projects that you're currently involved in.
So we got quite a bit to keep us busy, let's put it that way. Probably one of the main ones is the one at Fulham, where actually today we're doing a tenants launch party. So the way we're doing that one is it's actually a quite interesting new concept, by which instead of having one operator that run the whole building, we actually have 3 different tenants. And it is how they would work and cooperate in a building that you can actually not separate. The uses is a boutique hotel, about 90 keys. There is an element, quite chunk size of areas of event space and F&B, and the building itself is working into it is like walking into a church. So it's like very much Italianate style, but with stained glass windows that really, when the light comes through it, is like, wow. And there is an element of co-working as well. So it's how these three different uses combine and live together in the existing building, where it's a matter of also how, I would say, the infrastructure of the building itself, it is shared. So everything from like the circulation spaces, back of house spaces and so on, in order to maximize what will be the front of house elements of the building. Another one we're working on, we're actually doing something with Mortimer House itself. We can do like a nice cool bar on the top floor, which we got planning only like 2 weeks ago. It took about a year and a half to get. We're doing that, but also with the same client, we're looking at the new scheme in central London, which we went to see the building today. It looks fantastic. I was saying to Nicola just now, from the roof of it and looking over London and so on, actually feels like being in Paris instead. So there's all Haussmann kind of style roof, which is staggering, which is going to be a quite new, interesting concept coming up. So these are the main ones that are keeping us quite busy.
Back to the idea of circular economy. Of course, in an architectural project, materials are very important. Also, in terms of how a project can be sustainable. So, my question for you is, how do you approach or how do you influence choice of materials with the architects you work with? And how can materials inspire solution for the projects ahead in your view?
We obviously work with interior design and architects to implement the concept, and very often we will work either with an interior designer and an architect, or very often we will work with several interior designers and say like a couple of architects that will be either the shell and core one or the interior one, the implementation of the interior design. So our role, more specifically, it's a little bit to guideline and influence what perhaps will be the design choices and develop that concept together with the interior designer, looking at it very much from what makes sense from an actualization of the business case, i.e. in hotel development, it is a commercial project, and therefore there is return on investment that always needs to be understood. But it's also how the operational, it's how can I say, the understanding of the operational requirements on a project of that scale do influence the choice of materials, but also the design choices which are implemented in the building. So one thing, for example, I like to point out sometimes is, say, the architraves of bedrooms, which are often abused, right, by linen trolley or suitcases and whatever it is. If that can be designed to be easily demountable, it means that it can always look great. It is quick and cheap to implement, and it also means that from an operational point of view, it doesn't really need a lot of attic stock to keep spares. And the same principle can be applied to tables or the edges of chairs, which can be easily demountable in order to be replaced when required. So we influence that approach. But we often, what we like to do is look at the building for what it is to drive that inspiration. So, for example, in Mortimer House, as we were talking about earlier, when we started to strip out the building, and that's something actually that I pushed very early on to do without getting too technical outside of the main contract. It reveals a lot of the original patina and the pattern of the building. So we reused the existing timber flooring, or the soffit, which are these terracotta tiles, which are quite quite unusual actually for a London context, were reused and reinterpreted in new ways, integrated where it was required. But then we also took materials like a rattan, for example, that is commonly used for furniture, and we used it from some chairs to the acoustic screens for some of the ceilings, all the way to some of the doors. There was also another approach where the designers really liked this tweed pattern that we use for some furniture, and we actually used it as a wallpaper covering. So there was a kind of a new way of doing it. But so yeah, so what we do is we will lead a little bit the choice of the materials, leaving, however, the designers freehand in that sense, which is, I mean, at the end of the day, the reason why we will get them on board.
In terms of leading, who leads the project? Is it the investor? Is it the developer? Is it the architect? Is it a melting pot of these, in your perception?
Thanks for the question. It's interesting because we work on projects which are, so in hotels and hospitality, I don't know for who is not familiar with, but there will generally be an owner, who is basically the asset owner of the building, and then there is an operator, right? So the owner is the one that will put in the money, in simple terms, the operator is the one that spends that. We, generally speaking, we tend to work for owners, because that's generally the case as it happens, and very often it's a matter of aligning business interests which are divergent for that very same nature. And therefore, I always say it is how get them running on parallel tracks. It will never be the same, because obviously it's part of the nature of the business, but it's getting them running in parallel tracks. I often talk about this like the relationship between husband and wife, where we will be in between to kind of get streamlined. But then on top of that, there is, and that's obviously the most fundamental one, because it's the one that drives the actualization of the business case. So if, and therefore the reason why hospitality projects, they are very much developed for a specific operator. It would never really happen, so at least on the top ones, that there would be like, almost like a building with kind of a white canvas, and then finding an operator that fit it, just because, or at least the project that we tend to work on, the operational models are quite specific that will need to work, can only work in a specific context. To make an example, the Standard Hotel in King's Cross, that was an existing brutalist building with very deep floor plates. So the with an extension, there's about a 3 stories extension on top. But therefore one was dictated by the facade in terms of what was the width of the room. But because the floor span was quite deep, if one was actually to just cut the building like that, we'll end up with very long and narrow rooms, which besides being dysfunctional from an operational point of view, they also look bad, right? So the only way was actually to carve an area in the middle, which in other contexts and for other operators, they would serve from everything from conference room, to back of house space and so on, but that's not really what the business model of the operator does. So we thought, well, how about doing windowless rooms? And this is for a lifestyle upscale brand. And the original idea was, well, we got King's Cross across the road. Worst case scenario, we can sell them on a last let basis. Then we did the mock-up room. Mock-up room is literally, we would do a sample of that room. That could be either on site, if it's a refurbishing product, or very often off site. Actually, with that building, we did it across the road in the canteen of the old town hall, which was quite interesting. But we pushed to one of these windowless rooms being mocked up, and that's when we realized that the design was so powerful and so interesting. I don't know for who has ever. I don't know if you've seen the building, but I really recommend you to go and see it. But so when you walk in the core room, which now they market it as the cozy room, there is a walk-in shower that seems like being in a jungle. There is everything really feels nice and cozy, which then conversely, which is the reason why I think that spending a little bit of time and money perhaps on the design and also on the product does bring value in the end, because then revise the P&L forecast to sell that room to a very similar rate as the standard one, and then now they're trying to bring the value up. So from a room which has got no windows and 24 rooms on top as part of 273, they make quite good portion of the revenue generating model for the hotel. So that's why I think it's always how thinking outside of the box and collaterally can actually bring added value.
That's a good point. Let's go back for a minute on materials. We are here today in the showroom of a leading manufacturer of ceramic tiles and porcelain stoneware, Marazzi. And I would like to ask you, how would you consider this material within a wider palette of possibilities for interior architecture? It
comes to my mind the project that we're now doing in Fulham, where I was saying it's everything is listed inside and outside, and in addition to a lot of timber paneling, we got a few of the walls which are actually fully tiled. That's floor to ceiling, fully tiled, listed. It's probably, I think, the only building I've ever worked in where the toilets are actually listed. We can't do anything about it, and it's how obviously, that these are being upgraded and implemented with the use of hotel, because we can't touch any of the tiles. But so what we're doing in there is specifically from a tile perspective, it's how integrating with a new design, the existing tiles, but also how to create, I'm going to say, a little bit the human factor into the scheme. So the interior designer came up with this quite, I think, funky and interesting ideas where, and we're only at the concept stage now, where some of the tiles actually are reinterpreted, or the new ones that we're going to do, are reinterpreted in a punk rock kind of approach in a building which is very classical in look. And the idea behind this, because that building was used many decades ago by The Clash to do one of their gigs inside. And therefore, we're trying to see how we can develop a new product that has got a little bit more of that feature, whether it's a, I don't know, like a graffiti that comes into it, whether it's a bespoke product, whether it's in the way it is set up, but to convey that element of uniqueness. It comes to my mind what a lot Philip Stark will do, right? He will often use a very standard approach, but then there is the twist that comes into it. So you will have in one of the latest ones, actually, that was done in Paris, say the concert room would have seats all of the same colors, and then there is that one seat that has got a different one. Or the former Sanderson Hotel, which was also another one of the projects that we worked on, everything was nice and square, but then you had the bed that was twisted, right? And the picture, or there was a painting actually hung on the ceiling rather than on the wall. And therefore, yeah, it's what I like the fact that you would say, I never met him personally, but it was in his writing that is that human twisted approach that creates a little bit of empathy with the space. Okay. On London. So London is facing huge challenges and opportunities currently. And in a time of political uncertainties, it is of today the news that there is an agreement between politician Boris Johnson and the European, but needs to be approved by the Parliament, and that's all another issue. So in a time of political uncertainties, London is witnessing an incredible development in real estate. Everybody can see how many cranes there are around.
So how would you foresee London in, say, 3-5 years from now?
I think it's quite interesting what's happening in the sense that from a development perspective, you get, and then linking to what the current political climate has been influencing the sector. I think there is an element of institutional investors which are a little bit more cautious, and I think that's got a quite shared view, I would say, among private rooms. But then, or at least that's from more personal experience, most of the clients that we work with, they are very entrepreneurial in a sense, and therefore they see the disruption in the market as an opportunity to act and operate. And then that's, I think, is quite interesting, which also allows the small and young players to start to basically make a name for themselves in the market. But then looking at it a little bit more holistically, I think that the historic sectorialization of building types, i.e. Whether it is a residential, an office, or retail, it's a little bit being superseded by an integration of uses. So nowadays, specifically say for hotels, we look at hotels with co-working element onto it. And this is both actually integrating probably co-working spaces into what is probably a hotel use, but very often even making sure that areas which would have been a little bit underutilized, for example the lobby of a hotel, can actually be revitalized by having a co-working component onto it. Or a co-working look at hospitality to learn from in terms of how the service is run and how the experience is done. Working house is an example of which. Residential looks at hotel in the way the say the apartments would have been serviced. So even most of it will come with concierge, but we do everything. But then it's interesting how now there are also talks about co-retail, right, into the scheme, which is it's quite so it's how because no one really. The principle being behind that no one really has got time anymore to go shopping, so what if we bring the shopping into the workplace, right? Or the other way around, how some retail operators, how they can maximize some of the space by introducing the element of co-working into it. So what I think is interesting is that mix of uses into a building, because I mean at the end of the day, our life is not made, it's not square, but it's actually made of that mix of uses. We don't work anymore into a stereotypical office building. We don't work anymore with standard office hours and so on. And that's why I think really the future relies in looking at disruption as an opportunity to come up with something new.
So from one could say mono-use architecture to mixed-use architecture to an hybridization of uses.
Correct. Totally. Yeah.
Okay. Would you like to join the conversation? By any chance, any question or curiosity from your side? You're very welcome to drop in.
Okay. I think the last point is very interesting about the mix of uses. The fact that the world is changing, there is not anymore a house, a office, or workplace. It's the boundaries are blurred. Can you maybe tell us some examples where you've seen decision makers with open minds having a more open approach to this evolution? Because lots of people, I work with, for example, councils every day. The politicians and the councils are usually quite slow in understanding what's happening in reality. And maybe you have some example where you've seen, this guy understands and it's good to work with him, or I don't know, good examples of people looking forward in.
So I think there are some quite interesting operators out there doing very interesting things. So one of them being Ennismore, actually based not far from here with their Hoxton brand. So if you go to the one in Holborn, you will see that the lobby is actually packed of people working there, right? And they may not be like a direct revenue generator driver in that space, but there is definitely the buzz that comes from it, because obviously there is the F&B space associated with it, obviously creates a buzz. I also think at Mortimer House, once again, where what we do is we got the 5th floor, which is a co-working space. However, in times of the week where there is a low occupancy, namely a Friday evening or a Saturday evening, where obviously the office space will be empty, that space is actually transformed into a restaurant, which offers a menu completely different to the one on the ground floor, with a chef that basically changes on a monthly basis, but that becomes almost like a private dining room, almost another experience where you can take, say, your wife in there and have a more tailor-made, right, experience in a sense. So I think there are quite a few people out there coming up with new ideas and so on. It's interesting how I think it's interesting how from a design perspective point of view, how that design is thought in that context of the multitude of use, but then it's quite important that the operations go hand in hand, because you can have a beautiful product, but then if it's not run well, it doesn't work. Or conversely, you can be the best one at running the operational hotel, but if it is not designed to serve well that function, it will not work. So the question that you were asking earlier about where development is going on in London these days, the interesting thing is the cost of real estate in London is obviously rising, right? So it's actually hard to make the deals stack up on one side. Plus, the direct consequence of Brexit, and specifically in the hospitality sector, is the rising costs of the operations, right? So it costs more to run the space, and therefore the conversation becomes how design can address that challenges, and it's how a space is designed so that it can be run in a linear way. So, for example, a bedroom, if it is designed in a certain way, it will take a certain amount of time to clean it. And therefore, if you have X number of bedrooms, it means that you need X number of housekeeping staff, right? Or the journey from the kitchen to the restaurant floor, or to the back of our space, or how the restocking happens, if it's not thought in the proper way, operations are actually impacted, which means your cost of labor is going up. Does it make sense? So I think it's being able, interesting, I say, to look at things from different perspectives, and that's why I think it's interesting to be able to work across different sectors, because that's what brings the outside of the box thinking attitude. I mean, we work on projects where we had residential interior designers who had never done hotel before, and you're using that, and therefore it was a learning curve on that way. But that's also what will throw in, a new idea and a new thing, and it can be risky sometimes. But I think that's the interesting thing is how challenging the status quo of a design approach or of any approach.
I think we have space for another question, if you wish.
Typical and constrained building like the Fulham Town Hall, where the toilets are also listed, and what's your experience with architect and designer? Like in a sense that there is maybe the architect that I cannot do anything here, but then maybe there is the architect that is in this very constrained project. It becomes very inventive. I mean, can an architect or a designer make a difference on a particular project compared to another?
Absolutely. And but I think the main difference is in the difference of attitude and mindset. So I see constrictions within a building as opportunities come up, and that's what I think is the beauty of design, is paradoxically, I think it would be harder and probably less fun design on a blank canvas rather than on a building that has got a lot of history inside. And therefore, I think the quality of the architecture is to find the best with the means that they are in place. But then, of course, there are different approaches. There are different attitudes and so on, and that's why what very often is quite key for the project that we work on to make sure that everyone works in unison and so on, because that's really the only way to get a project across the line. So the one in Fulham specifically, we got 3 operators, and unless we're able to align 3 objectives, it's not going to work on a building that is challenging by itself, and the location is not established yet. But there is a lot of untapped potential to happen. So watch this space in a sense.
Thank you. So I think we can continue our conversation over a glass of wine and a wonderful Italian dinner. So thank you very much for our guest speaker, Giovanni Iasevoli.